Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is July 22nd. On this day in 1991, Milwaukee police entered a modest apartment on North 25th Street and discovered one of the most nightmarish crime scenes in American history. What they found would make the name Jeffrey Dahmer synonymous with unimaginable depravity. But it didn't start with a task force or a years-long manhunt. It all began because one man managed to escape. Today, we're revisiting how Dahmer was finally caught and the horrors that came to light afterward. Let's get started. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21st, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. On the surface, his early life looked typical, but beneath that facade were cracks that would later widen into something much darker. His parents, Lionel and Joyce, had a turbulent relationship. Jeffrey was quiet and withdrawn, and his behavior started changing after a double hernia surgery at age 6. Even as a child, Dahmer displayed deeply disturbing behavior. He became fascinated with dead animals, collecting roadkill, dissecting them, and keeping bones in jars. His father, who was a chemist, mistook his interest as scientific curiosity. It was only looking back that he would realize that these were ominous signs. Jeffrey also struggled socially. He drank heavily in high school, even sneaking alcohol into class. While some classmates remember him as the oddball who pulled pranks, there was a growing sense of isolation behind the antics. He also began having fantasies, not just sexual, but controlling, obsessive thoughts about dominating another person completely. 1978, just weeks after graduation, Dahmer picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. When Hicks tried to leave, Dahmer killed him, striking him with a dumbbell and strangling him. He dismembered the body, buried it, and then later returned to smash and scatter the bones. After a short stint in college and a few years in the military, Dahmer returned to civilian life, and his alcoholism only worsened. He had multiple arrests for indecent exposure, including incidents involving minors. In 1988, he was convicted of sexually assaulting a 13-year-old boy. He served time in a work release program but was largely left unsupervised. By the late 1980s, Dahmer's killing spree was well underway. His victims were often young men of color, many of them marginalized and vulnerable. He met them in gay bars or at bus stops, offering money or companionship. He drugged them, strangled them, and kept trophies. Bones, skulls, and even body parts that he intended to eat. Neighbors complained about strange smells and noises. One victim even escaped once, 14-year-old Konorak Synthasimphone, only to be returned to Dahmer by police who thought that it was a lover's spat. A lover's spat with a child. Despite his horrific crimes, Dahmer managed to evade capture for years. That is, until July 22nd, 1991. On that summer night, 32-year-old Tracy Edwards followed Dahmer back to his apartment, lured by promises of beer and cash in exchange for some photos. But once inside, something felt wrong. The smell in the apartment was overwhelming, and the place was a mess. A video of The Exorcist 3 was playing on repeat. Then, Dahmer snapped a handcuff on one of Edwards' wrists and pulled a knife. Edwards stayed calm. He chatted with Dahmer and tried to keep the situation from escalating, and he waited. After several terrifying hours, he saw his chance. He bolted out of the door and ran for help. Milwaukee police officers Rolf Mueller and Robert Routh spotted Edwards and listened to his story. They agreed to follow him back to the apartment. When Dahmer opened the door, he was relaxed, almost polite. But inside, officers found Polaroids, graphic photos of dismembered bodies that had been taken in that very apartment. The horror unraveled quickly. There was a human head in the fridge and organs in the freezer. There was even a barrel filled with decomposing torsos. There were skulls, bones, hands. It was a death chamber hiding in plain sight. Dahmer was arrested on the spot. And as police combed through the apartment, the extent of his crimes became clearer with every room they searched. Once in custody, Dahmer didn't fight. He didn't ask for a lawyer. Instead, he spoke. Over 60 hours of interviews, he calmly described 17 murders in chilling detail. He admitted to luring men into his apartment. He confessed to strangling them, performing necrophilia, taking photos, and even eating parts of their bodies. He had attempted bizarre experiments to create compliant, zombie-like partners by injecting acid into their brains. He kept trophies, heads, hearts, genitalia. He admitted to boiling flesh off of bones, to dissolving bodies in acid. And through it all, he remained eerily calm. When investigators asked why he had done all of this, Dahmer said that he couldn't bear to be alone. Killing was his way of making people stay. The confession brought some closure to grieving families, but it also raised painful questions. How had he gone undetected for so long? Why had authorities ignored earlier warnings? And how many lives could have been saved if someone had just acted sooner? Dahmer was charged with 15 counts of murder in Wisconsin, later adding a 16th in Ohio. His trial began on January 30th, 1992. The defense didn't argue innocence. Instead, they claimed insanity, citing necrophilia and deep psychological disorders. But prosecutors said that the crimes were too organized, too calculated for someone who didn't know right from wrong. He had taken steps to avoid getting caught. He understood exactly what he was doing. The trial was emotional. Victims' families sat in the courtroom, forced to listen to the gruesome details. One grieving relative even lunged at Dahmer during testimony, overwhelmed by rage and grief. On February 15, 1992, the jury found Dahmer guilty. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences, 957 years behind bars. He later received a 16th life term for his first murder. Dahmer was sent to Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. At first, he was placed in solitary for his safety, but later he was moved to a less secure unit where he took on cleaning duties. Fellow inmates were disturbed not just by his crimes, but by his dark sense of humor. He would mold food into shapes resembling body parts. He joked about cannibalism. Then, on November 28, 1994, Dahmer was attacked while cleaning a prison restroom. Fellow inmate Christopher Scarver bludgeoned him and another inmate, Jesse Anderson, with a metal bar. Dahmer was pronounced dead shortly thereafter. He was 34. Scarver later said that he was driven by rage over Dahmer's crimes and his behavior in prison. Some saw it as vigilante justice, while others felt that Dahmer had escaped the punishment that he truly deserved. His ashes were divided between his parents. But the scars he left behind are permanent. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found today's episode compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day, True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!